In 2013, Game Freak released Pokemon X and Y for the Nintendo 3DS. It was the first mainline 3D entry in the franchise, and would set the tone for every subsequent release. Pokemon's shift to the third dimension came with some growing pains. It's not the first instance of a franchise struggling when making the transition from 2D to 3D, with many franchises struggling to make the transition like Sonic the Hedgehog. Modern Pokemon seems to struggle from many issues that were not as prevalent in the older 2D titles, such as poor map design, a lack of difficulty, and becoming consumed by its traditional formula. It's a franchise that in many ways feels like it is stuck in the 90s. Before I get into my problems with where the series has gone, I think it's important you understand my background with Pokemon. I first discovered Pokemon as a child in 2009. Prior to this, my Nintendo DS exclusively played Mario Kart DS. The first Pokemon game I ever played was Pokemon Platinum, and I loved it. I remember getting stuck for about a week wondering how to traverse Mount Coronet to get to Snowpoint City. Pokemon Platinum got its hooks into me, and I enjoyed every minute of that game I played. I played every Pokemon game from then on, and enjoyed every minute of them, until the transition to 3D. For me, Pokemon would peak at Black 2 and White 2. My first playthrough of Black 2 went for close to 300 hours. I did absolutely everything that you could do in terms of side content, from the Black Tower to the Nature Preserve. When Pokemon shifted to 3D with X and Y, the growing pains were immediately evident. Problems introduced in Generation 6 would begin to persist throughout every game following, and in some cases only get worse, only to crescendo when Pokemon made the jump to the Switch. Modern Pokemon games have gotten progressively worse in terms of how their maps are designed. The map layout of old had it where regions would be designed in a way the player would constantly have to pass through old areas with new tools. This would give players the option to further explore old areas. It encouraged exploration of an old area to discover something new. You could find a very powerful Pokemon, or an item to help you on your journey. Roadblocks would encourage the player to make a mental note, to come back and discover what was awaiting them once the proper tools were acquired. Modern Pokemon has completely gotten rid of this sense of exploration and discovery. The Galar region in Pokemon Sword and Shield is perhaps the most evident of this. The region is essentially a series of connected hallways built around the game's key feature, the wild area. You progress through the region in a rather linear fashion, with no reason to revisit prior areas because there is no optional areas in the game to visit. The thrill of exploration was gone. Even with the wild area being a wide open area in the game, there isn't as much depth to the exploration for that area. The bulk of the fun to be had in that area is the sheer variety of Pokemon you can encounter. However, the area is essentially one flat plane with different weather strung throughout, making it less interesting. The main purpose of the wild area is just to serve as a hub for Pokemon raids. If there's one thing I will praise about modern Pokemon, it's the introduction of raid dens. The idea of joining up with 3 friends to take on powerful Pokemon in hopes of catching them is an amazing concept for Pokemon. It's a really great way to make Pokemon with better IVs more obtainable while also providing a challenge for players to acquire them. Raid dens are a concept I hope they eventually explore more and fills that Pokemon MMO shaped hole in our hearts. The problem of map design is especially evident in Generation 9 of Pokemon. The big selling point of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is that they were the first truly open world Pokemon games. However, I don't think this is to the benefit of the series and is instead to its detriment. The world of Generation 9 is empty, with no reason to explore any further than you really have to. Beyond Pokemon and Terra raids, there's not really much side content to engage with. Pokemon is an RPG. A key feature of RPGs is quests and side quests. Where are the side quests? Where are the quests that were even present in the previous entry, Pokemon Legends Arceus? The quests in Legends Arceus, for the most part, were basic with the exception of the ones that revolved around catching legendary Pokemon. Quests in Arceus give players more of a reason to exist in that world, beyond the main story. Even if it was only the basic quest from Arceus, this would go a long way in providing somewhat compelling content to make the world feel less empty. Let's compare the map layout of a region like Kanto to Galar. While the Kanto routes are very straightforward, there is a lot of reason to backtrack. Areas like the Power Plant are optional, but you are rewarded for going there because that's where Zapdos is located. Same with the Seafoam Islands. You don't have to go there. Upon traversing through a series of puzzles, you are rewarded with an encounter with Articuno. None of this is there in Sword and Shield. I don't think there was an area in the game that required me to complete a puzzle to traverse it. The fact that puzzles in the world are missing feeds into the poor hallway map design. There is no areas in Sword and Shield that reward you for exploring them. meaning there is no reason to revisit any area in the game. One thing that I really enjoyed about the older Pokemon games was the expansive post-games that would come along with them. Even after the games went 3D, there were still titles that had expansive post-game content, like Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Games like Black 2 White 2 and Heart Gold Soul Silver had hundreds of hours of ancillary content that the player could engage in. They were games where you could see the time and effort that was put into them. Every game on Switch has had little to no post-game, except Legends Arceus and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which is a remake. Generation 8 and 9 opted to sell you the post-game as DLC. The DLC for Pokemon Sword and Shield is better than the game itself. It's good content that enhances a lacking game, and probably should have been included in the game to improve the post-game experience. There's only 2 pieces of post-game content for base Sword and Shield: the Battle Tower and the story content to catch your box legendary. Outside of this, there is no post-game content. So if you are not interested in competitive Pokemon battling, you are out of luck, go buy the DLC. How I operate with games is I perceive each purchase as quality to price. How much am I spending for the quality of the content I am receiving? Pokemon received a $10 price increase on the Switch and had the goal to give the player less content. At $50, it was easier to overlook these issues with Pokemon. But at $60, Pokemon needs to be delivering a more polished and refined experience than what they have been delivering. It is not okay to hold my previous Pokemon hostage for a fee because you didn't want to include a national dex. Pokemon has inherently become a design nightmare the longer it has progressed, with models and animations now having to be completed for over 1,000 creatures. One key thing that has bothered me with modern Pokemon is the lack of standardization of features between games. Legends Arceus was a good step in the right direction for the series. It introduced new aspects to the formula of the franchise, like Pokemon now being able to attack humans, and the addition of being able to aim and throw a Pokeball. It added a layer to catching a Pokemon. You could successfully catch new Pokemon without ever deploying one of your party members. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the aggro Pokemon are gone, and so is the aim reticle, but for some reason, you are still given the option to throw Pokeballs. However, the only thing you can throw is your party members. Gone is the added layer of stealth with catching Pokemon. Now you have to engage in a battle. Legends Arceus was a breath of fresh air in many ways, and this is most evident in how it evolved Pokemon battles. An extra layer was added to battles by changing them from turn-based to active time. The active time battles allowed Game Freak to further experiment with the battle system by introducing strong and agile style for moves. It gives players more options in how they can tackle a battle. Now, at the cost of PP, you can use one of these styles to either deal more damage or have the potential of doing 2 slightly weaker attacks instead of 1. In Scarlet and Violet, these additions are absent, with the game reverting back to the typical turn-based battle system, which is just stale. The game also removed a much welcomed quality of life feature from Legends. When you encounter a shiny Pokemon in Legends, there's a sound to alert you to it. It's impossible to not know about a shiny Pokemon in Legends because of the sound. In Generation 9, you need to know the exact color palette of a Pokemon and be looking all over. Otherwise, you won't know if a Pokemon is shiny. You won't be aware if you missed one. One of my biggest complaints with Pokemon has become that there's no challenge in it anymore. The introduction of an always-on EXP share, while convenient, removed all the challenge and management associated with the earlier games. I wouldn't mind the new way that the EXP share works if it gave me the option of how I would like it to work. Why not give options to the player, like turning it off or being able to select the Pokemon that will gain experience from it? This would help bring back some of the management and challenge of the older games. Pokemon has stopped relying on its main gimmick of catch them all, and instead felt the need to invent a new gimmick for each game since Generation 6. The gimmick that is introduced is then discarded by the next generation. Z-moves and Mega Evolution have made no appearances in games since Generation 7. Gigantamax is absent from Generation 9. A key reason for gimmicks is that it allows Game Freak to reinvent old favourites and make them new again, preying on the nostalgia of older or lapsed Pokemon fans in hopes that it lures them back in. Modern Pokemon has many issues, from its map design, de-evolution of exploration, and lack of difficulty. Isn't it ironic that Pokemon, a 2D franchise which began in the 90s and is currently heavily preying on 90s nostalgia, is having the same issues that games had in the 90s when making the transition from 2D to 3D? They went extra hard on the 90s nostalgia. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe to my channel. What do you think about modern Pokemon? Do you enjoy it? Do Do you have inherent problems with it? Let me know in the comments.